when I give talks on this, I have a picture, which was actually AI generated, of a huge 200-foot wingspan eagle that's carrying a passenger fuselage, right? So a sort of fuselage-like thing full of human passengers. Back in the old days, you might remember that this is what air transportation used to be like. These giant birds that they bred, they made them bigger and bigger and bigger until they could carry these big passenger tubes. And, they just kept eating all the passengers. And the FAA kept saying, well, we can't give you an airworthiness certification because the birds keep eating the passengers. And even when they don't, they drop them in the ocean, or they feed them to their baby bird. It's like, and the airline companies were really frustrated, but eventually they realized that they had chosen a technology path that could never be safe. And they went back to the drawing board and they said, okay, let's work on mechanical airplanes, even though it's not really sexy and it's going to take a lot of math, hard, nasty math we'll have to work out. But they did, and we're very glad that that's how it happened. So that's going to happen with AI, I'm afraid.
This is Daniel Fagelli. You're tuned into The Trajectory. This is our 9th episode in the AGI Governance series with none other than Stuart Russell. Many, many years ago, AGI as just a general topic, never mind AGI safety as a general topic, was basically a ghost town in academia. Within the bigger, more credible institutions, there weren't really anybody making noise, so to speak, about this topic and theme, with one exception, and that's Stuart Russell. He's luckily been able to live through seeing Bengio and Hinton and many other reputable researchers sort of turn the corner and say maybe AGI is possible and maybe there's some things that might not automatically go swell about it. But in this episode, we talk about what Stuart thinks governance in the real world would look like. There's a lot more focus on coordination. This very interview was recorded in Shanghai at the WAIC conference in Shanghai that they run every year. Stuart and a bunch of other big names were out there. Stuart talks about, in practical terms, what would coordination look like. He also talks about what he hopes happens differently in the technical side of AGI governance. So where should we be applying our focus differently in terms of research? And he uses probably the funniest analogy we've ever heard on the show. Like, I loved this analogy and I plan on tweeting about it a pretty good deal. So you'll stick around for that. I'll save my comments for the end of the episode as usual. Without further ado, this is Stuart Russell here on The Trajectory. So Stuart, glad we're getting to catch up.
My pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's been half a decade since we had a lengthy discussion about artificial general intelligence and governance. You were obviously among the earliest voices here. Now there's a few more that have sort of joined the discussion. And I want to kind of begin with where we are now. I mean, so much has shifted. And now the big international events. I mean, we have AI solidarity as kind of a big meta theme for a conference like this. If you were to explain to kind of leaders, policy thinkers, where are we today and sort of what new challenges, new opportunities have emerged, how do you like to nutshell it for people? How do you think about it?
So you're right. A lot has changed since 2019 when I wrote Human Compatible.
Yep.
At that time, large language models were sort of a glimmer in a few people's eyes.
Yeah.
But certainly no one in the real world had even heard of them. Although they were using them actually to improve typing on their cell phone when it tries to figure out what word you're going to type.
They were using them, but unknowingly.
And no one thought, oh my goodness, this technology is going to take over the world, right?
Yes.
The thing that tells you the next word on your phone. So it's pretty amazing what's happened. So back then, people were impressed by the performance of deep learning for vision and speech recognition. They had seen deep reinforcement learning enable AI systems to defeat the world's best Go players. And that precipitated actually China's decision that AI was the most important technology for geopolitical domination and to invest $150 billion. That was announced back in 2017, I think. So since then, of course, the large language models have burst on the scene. ChatGPT, late 2022, GPT-4 in March of 23, and then a whole slew of models, including DeepSeek in China.
Yep.
So those models have completely changed the conversation for at least two reasons, right? One is that now hundreds of millions of people have a foretaste of what it's like to have general purpose intelligence on tap. And a lot of people really do think of it that way. They think, my goodness, I've got this super smart butler who does whatever I want, and figures things out for me, writes stuff for me, and so on. And then you've got the people in industry who are thinking, wow, this is, for all intents and purposes, a virtual human.
Yep.
And my goodness, I could fire 50,000 employees and replace them with 10,000 of these bots and imagine how much money. Now, it hasn't worked out that way.
No, it's been very slow going in enterprise.
And there's a lot of evidence actually suggesting that what we thought of as cast iron gains, like in software engineering, everyone knew that, wow, you can make software engineers 30 to 40% more efficient.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out that when you equip top-level software engineers with these systems, they are 20% slower at producing code of the same quality. And a lot of the code that the not-so-top software engineers produce using this technology is full of holes, often doesn't do what you think it does. It looks like the right kind of thing, but it actually does something not at all what you want.
Yeah.
So I think this is still early days in all kinds of industries figuring out where are the niches where we can afford to put in systems that have, let's call it 80% reliability, 90% reliability, but often not close to the level in any kind of high stakes pathway that you might want. So that's one process that's going on. The other process that's going on is that the major AI companies, Google DeepMind, OpenAI, Anthropic, Meta, some of the Chinese companies, are investing god-awful amounts of money, maybe $500 billion this year, possibly twice that next year, we don't know yet, but in creating AGI. So not chatbots that get the right answer 80% of the time and are often completely clueless, but systems that exceed, in a reliable way, exceed human capabilities in every dimension.
Yeah.
And because every dimension includes the ability to do AI research, one assumes that those systems will then be able to accelerate their own improvement by coming up with new ways of training, new architectures, maybe even better hardware designs, and so on, so that that process then accelerates really hard. So I think governments are faced with a question. I think they're beginning to accept that AGI arriving with no solution in sight for how to control it could be potentially catastrophic. And to many people in government, this feels kind of a bit woo-woo science fiction.
Still, yeah.
Like, are you serious? But, when someone's investing more than we've ever invested in any science and technology project in the history of the world, you have to take them seriously when they say, oh, and by the way, there's a 20% chance we're going to make the human race extinct.
Yeah.
Right? And that's not the fringe critics.
No.
That's
the founders of the
founders of the
organizations.
companies are saying that. I spoke to one recently who told me that his best case scenario is that we have a Chernobyl-sized disaster, and that causes the governments to take this seriously. Because right now the governments are not taking it seriously.
Well, this takes us into, so you're outlining kind of current trends, dynamics, now challenges and risks. This is obviously there. I mean, the financial singularity was always to precede the technological one, and we are seeing exactly that. Where would the money go but in building the great sand god? I mean, look, it's the final competition. It's obviously the final competition on a national and kind of corporate level. But of course, that brute competition with no understanding of how we control it is net negative. I think when you talk to, I think of these as, I'd love to know your take on this. I think of these as cries for help, right? Musk is on Rogan and he's like,
it could just kill us all, right? Dario's like, it could just kill us all. They sit down with you and they say, best case Chernobyl. I see that as a cry for help. What is the cry for help? They're essentially saying, I'm in a circumstance where I have two choices as a founder of an AGI company. One, I can build the sand god, have maybe a final 2 years or 2 months of glory, knowing that sort of I birthed the thing beyond humanity and then I'm decimated. Or I can not build it. Someone else will build it for sure. And I can have a final 2 months or 2 years of shame and be eternally shamed by whoever conjures the sand god. And those are my only two choices. And by golly, I don't know if I really like those choices, but I'm stuck there, right? Dario just had a little memo that got leaked, said something like, they just did a bunch of stuff in the Middle East when they said they wouldn't or something. He said like, man, as it turns out, not letting, bad guys have access to our tech just doesn't make business sense or something like that. I see these as calls for help. Do you see it similar?
No, I think that's exactly right. They feel like they're locked in a prisoner's dilemma. I mean, exactly as you described it, right? They know that if they all stopped, or they all waited until they had a solution for how to make it safe, then we'd all be better off. But they individually can't do that. So it's exactly like a prisoner's dilemma. But in a prisoner's dilemma, there is no separate government that you can appeal to. And you can't talk to each other, right?
Yeah.
Now, on topics like safety, even under antitrust law, you are allowed to talk to each other if it's in the public interest and you're not colluding to prevent competition. And you can certainly talk to governments and tell the government, look, each of us individually thinks that if this race continues, it's a race off a cliff.
Yeah.
Right? And we're racing off a cliff without a steering wheel.
Ridiculous.
So what should governments do? And I think one answer is, here's a way you can build AI systems that are safe, and you can mandate that way of building AI systems. Now, in the research in my lab, we have approaches that we think could, in principle, lead to provably safe systems. And we've been working on that since 2014. But there's a lot of hard research questions that still remain to be solved. But
certainly.
We are making serious progress, right? For example, now we have a Minecraft assistant where you can go into Minecraft and the assistant comes with you. And the assistant has no idea what you want to do, but it's a good assistant. So we call them assistance game solvers. So they observe your behavior. From that, they infer what you want to have happen, and then they help you make it happen.
This is like your book extrapolated, right?
I mean, so they don't want to do the same thing as you, right? If you want to drink a cup of coffee, they don't want to drink a cup of coffee. They want to
help you get a cup of coffee.
They want to bring you a cup of coffee, right?
Yeah.
And so you start building, a bridge. They'll figure out you're building a bridge. They'll start to help you, and it actually works. It actually makes you more efficient at constructing the thing you're trying to construct, whatever it is. And that's, I think, really, it's not universal scale, but that's a pretty substantial demonstration. Probably more interesting than, let's say, DQN was when DeepMind showed that you could learn how to play Atari video games. Minecraft is way more complicated than any of those video games.
Pong or whatever little games they were playing.
Yeah. So that's one approach, right? Is here's a way to build safe AI systems and mandate that. My sense is that that's typically not how governments regulate technologies. What they do instead is to say, here's the level of safety that we require. Here is the risk that we can tolerate.
Yeah.
So, for example,
airlines or whatever.
Airplane. It needs to be a lot safer than, driving a car or sitting in your living room. Nuclear power station. Well, how often do you want nuclear power stations to go Chernobyl next to one of your major cities?
Yeah.
Probably maybe once in every 10 million years.
Yeah.
So, right? And you can do the math and you can figure out, on a per year basis, how much risk are we
Likelihoods,
incurring, and then how much benefit are we getting from having the nuclear power station. And they settled on initially 10,000 years when they only had a few, and now it's 10 million years. So you have to just provide a proof to the government that your nuclear power station has a failure rate of 1 in 10 million years. And the government does not say, how do you design it?
Yeah.
They don't say, this is the standard design, you have to build it this way.
Of course.
Right? It's just a kind of a separation of concerns. And it's government wants safety for the people. Manufacturers build things that have that level of safety, and we're all good.
To play by the rules,
right?
yeah.
And so if governments were to say, okay, you can build your AI systems any way you want, but here are the criteria, and you have to prove they meet these criteria, then I'd be pretty happy. And examples, we call them red lines. Here are unacceptable behaviors by AI systems. They should not replicate themselves without permission. They should not break into other computer systems. They should not impersonate human beings. They should not improve their own capabilities.
That's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd love to get your thoughts on that, because you're listing all these and I'm like, okay, like I'm imagining like what's Zuckerberg having his team do? What's Altman having his team do? What's DeepSeek's leadership having their team do? It's like, impersonate people, no, don't do that. Like, harm human beings, no, don't do that. Improve itself, we should definitely do that, right? I mean, they're in the arms race. We just talked about it.
Yeah.
They got two choices. You have the final glory, you have the final shame, and then, the machines do what they will with you. How do we prevent that one? Like, what are your thoughts there? Because this is a toughie.
So you, the idea with these safeties is not how do you prevent your nuclear power station from blowing up. It's you can't have your nuclear power station blowing up, and if you can't prove that it's not going to blow up, then you can't build it.
So if you can't prove it's not improving itself, I mean, some of the labs are just blatantly obvious about like, well, yeah, of course we're having it improve itself, right? There's blatantly obvious.
Not exactly. That's not really what's happening. It's there are many humans in that loop.
Sure.
In that loop.
Certainly.
And the AI systems are not close to being able to do the kind of AI research that would make qualitative changes. So
is it a continua though, Stuart? On the continua one, it's like humans write every semicolon. And then on this continua, it's like no more humans, AI expands its powers. It does feel as though we're moving across the continuum.
We're certainly, it's becoming easier and easier to write down what you want to have happen with the code. And then the system makes the modification. So that, I think the primary effect there is as if we had a self-improving loop in the sense that, what used to take 6 months and 1,000 engineers to do now might take 6 hours and one engineer to do. They would just iterate on the prompt and the checking of the code and so on. So that speeds up the development cycle. But at any point, the human can simply refrain from giving the next prompt, and then it's done. So, but I certainly take your point. It's a slippery slope.
And the incentives bend in that direction.
The incentives bend that way. But we must have that control. And so this type of red line, so any of these red lines, the problem that the developers face, and the reason they're kicking and screaming and objecting and trying to sabotage any discussion of red lines, is that they haven't the faintest idea how to demonstrate compliance.
Yeah. I mean, but it's
and
like
their view is, well, you can't have any safety requirement unless we know how to comply with it, which is a fallacy. It sounds very sensible. Of course, you can't have a requirement that we can't comply with, but no, we can have a requirement because we don't want to die.
Yeah,
and if you don't know how to not kill us, then you need to stop doing this altogether. Right? It's very, very simple.
I think your point immediately stands. I think the reason they push back is because they know we stop, they keep going. if we stop in the Western world, it'll go on somewhere, right? I think when they say we
yeah,
can't,
I mean, we hear this argument.
of course,
right?
I'm not saying it's valid. Of course, I'm very much advocating for some degree of global coordination, but I think that's the tension that makes them push back, even though the requirement is reasonable. Is that, yeah, they feel like, well, someone else will do it.
Well, they feel like, well, but you're taking away my baby. How can I achieve glory and immortality
For that final
if I
2 months
if I have to do all that hard software safety engineering work that I don't know how to do because I don't understand my system. I don't understand how they work. I don't know how to stop them from doing these bad things. So I have to sort of go back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
And so when I give talks on this, I have a picture which was actually AI generated of a huge 200-foot wingspan eagle that's carrying a passenger fuselage, right? So a sort of fuselage-like thing full of human passengers. And, I say, well, back in the old days, you might remember that this is what air transportation used to be like. These giant birds that they bred, they made them bigger and bigger and bigger until they could carry these big passenger tubes. And, they just kept eating all the passengers. And the FAA kept saying, well, we can't give you an airworthiness certification because the birds keep eating the passengers. And even when they don't, they drop them in the ocean, or they feed them to their baby birds. It's like, and the airline companies were really frustrated, but eventually they realized that they had chosen a technology path that could never be safe. And they went back to the drawing board and they said, okay, let's work on mechanical airplanes, even though it's not really sexy and it's going to take a lot of math, hard, nasty math we'll have to work out. But they did, and we're very glad that that's how it happened. So that's going to happen with AI, I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, that's a great analogy. I got to find that on YouTube or something like that. But I like it. It's like we could imagine all kinds of tech trees, past and future, where you're just hitting a dead end. Period. You're not gonna be able to do it in a way that's reliably gets an outcome that's good for humans. I guess this sort of beckons what that international coordination would look like. So you're bringing up very clearly, okay, you can't make it provably safe. Well, then come up with a different way of building the tech. Of course, we'd have to coordinate globally around that. And there's all kinds of tensions that sort of make that exceedingly challenging right now. Although I think with hope, there's ways around it. We'll talk a bit about track 2 dialogue. I know you've been fostering as much of that as you can. I'm here for that reason as well. But let's talk first about, the analogy with sort of the atomic energy world, the IAEA. The idea is that you've had a number of articles and references sort of mentioning maybe we'll want to have a route along those lines that might even involve the governance of hardware. Walk a bit through what you think political leaders need to understand nutshell-wise, and then I'd love to know your thoughts about what you hope to see as the early momentum to get there, because you're setting up why it's necessary. I think it's a compelling argument. The giant, pasture-eating bird is it's a good mental image. Nutshell, I guess, what that might look like, and then what you hope might happen to get there.
So I should begin by saying I'm not an expert on international relations and organization design and so on. I'm aware that there are different models. People get a little bit nervous when you say IAEA. IAEA, it's difficult to say.
It is.
International Atomic Energy Agency.
Yes.
So that was set up in the aftermath of World War II with the idea that this technology is extremely dangerous. And we have to control its deployment. So nations can have it, but they have to agree to a whole set of safeguards that are quite intrusive. So the IAEA inspectors can show up in your office and demand your files and demand to inspect your centrifuges and this, that, and the other. There are other organizations like International Civil Aviation Organization, International Maritime Organization, where they don't show up in the offices of the nuclear power generators or the weapons developers or anything like that. They kind of show up in the offices of the regulator. And so you agree to implement certain regulatory structures within your national legislation. and then your national regulator interacts with the international organization because you've signed a treaty saying we will maintain compliance with that. And there's a process where they can, the international organization can object to the lack of some safeguard or a misimplementation of a regulation, and that gets resolved somehow. I don't know all the details. That seems, I think, politically much more feasible, you might think. In fact, any progress on any kind of international coordination of any kind at the moment is so difficult. I mean, here's the situation we face, right? It's sort of like, okay, which side of the road should we drive on? We could all drive on the right or we could all drive on the left. And then there's some guys who are saying, no, I have more power if I can drive on both sides of the road. So we cannot have an agreement on which side of the road we should drive on. And then, of course, you don't have any roads, right? It's a complete and utter disaster. So, this idea that you have to, make some agreements, surrender a little bit of freedom of choice so that you can have roads that work is not rocket science, but nonetheless, there are some parties currently who really object to that way of thinking. But putting that aside, I think we can begin with principles that everyone agrees to on how AI should function and how it should operate in marketplaces and so on. And for example, everyone I've talked to agrees that you have a right to know if you're interacting with a human being or a machine, right? So this is sometimes called disclosure or labeling, or sometimes called no impersonation of human beings. And that's a pretty simple principle. It's hard to really think of uses that aren't fraudulent for that kind of AI system.
The people developing it seem incented to pay attention to that too, right? You wouldn't want to be the one, Anthropic wouldn't want to be the one company impersonating Stuart Russell or someone else, right?
Well, it doesn't have to be, but think about, your washing machine's not working. You go to the website of the manufacturer. It says,
you're talking to Sally.
Do you need some help? Here's Sally, Sally. And then you realize actually Sally hasn't the faintest idea what you're talking about and isn't a human being at all. And that's sort of, it's annoying, but it's not awful. But then you can imagine many worse situations. And they're just the fundamental fact is you owe a duty to other human beings of politeness and time and decency and honesty. You don't owe any of those things to machines. And often they're actually consuming your time and deceiving you when they have no right to. So I think things that are pretty much universally agreed, and possibly some of these red line principles, right? The idea of an AI system replicating itself without authorization, so to speak, is something that no society would want to have happen. There might be a few exceptions for deep space exploration or something like that, where you're already 20 light years away from Earth and they can replicate themselves out there to do more work. But that's in some sense pre-authorized replication. The examples around AI systems not breaking into other AI systems or into other computer systems, again, these are things that most societies would say, yeah, that's extremely sensible. And, you want to prevent that happening across borders as well. So there's a lot of reasons why countries would agree to these kinds of regulations.
I'm just going to nutshell what you're saying. So this is a good tee up. Essentially what you're saying is, there's like the ICAO model, the IAEA model, there's different orchestrated ideas there. And we've interviewed a number of people that have had kind of proposed international plans. But fundamentally what you're saying is, yes, different people have different incentives to vote for right side of the road, left side of the road, both sides of the road. But maybe there are some things we can get along with and sort of have as like let's call it a toehold into international coordination through things we can agree with. It would seem as though, I'm going to put out what I see in the world and see if you disagree, and what I've seen wrestled with from other guests as well. It would seem as though even to sort of get along about the banal things, like not impersonating people or whatever, people would resist, because why would I want to toehold into more governance and having to agree with people? And like you said, it's so hard. I mean, chemical weapons took decades and decades, and by the time it was done, nobody used them anyway. You know, it was really, really rough, painful thing. It feels like there must be an urgency catalyst to even getting the most banal applications going, because most people in governance, now slightly more than when you and I chatted last, but to be frank, even in the, let's frame this lightly. Even in intergovernmental organization bodies explicitly tasked with thinking about the farther future, terms like AGI are overtly kept at an arm's length on many occasions. So,
sometimes, yeah. I mean, for example, UN General Assembly is going to be discussing creating a new agency specifically to govern AGI. So that's some traction. I think it's moved into the window of acceptability.
Definitely. But I'm going to get into the urgency mechanisms that could drive this. So the ideas will be on the table, but for those to bite, what I sense, you mentioned Chernobyl, or one of the lab leaders mentioned Chernobyl. Yeah. It seems to me like there does have to be a real catalytic driver to say we kind of must agree. And it strikes me that one way to potentially do that is to get the citizenry to sort of wake up to AGI risk, to find a way to catalyze citizenry. And this is an extremely challenging thing, which I think is going to have to involve flavoring it for the political right and flavoring it for the left. It's, in order to sink it into the everyman brain, you're going to really have to water it down. It's going to be dirty work, real dirty work. But I know people doing that. What are your thoughts there?
I think the idea that AI safety is a woke concern, which is something we are hearing in DC.
We are.
Is utterly bizarre.
It's a marketing problem.
It's weird beyond belief that the survival of human civilization is something that is considered politically unacceptable to even discuss. But putting that aside, right? There have been in popular culture, for example, the last Mission Impossible movie explicitly involves a super intelligent AI that succeeds in taking over human civilization, taking control of all the nuclear arsenals on the planet. And it requires Tom Cruise to succeed in 10 successive 1,000,000 to 1 chance of success escapades to actually overcome the AI system. So, but I think that, Hollywood always wants to have the good guys win in the end.
Yeah.
And so people get lulled into a sense of false security. I would love to see a macroscopic version of Ex Machina. So in Ex Machina, the good guy doesn't win. The AI system, I hope I'm not spoiling this for anyone, but the AI system wins, and the good guy ends up imprisoned, probably going to die of starvation.
Yeah.
And the AI systems escape. But that's only, that's one victim.
Yes, it's tiny.
Or 2 victims. But a macroscopic version of that, because it's a very, very realistic depiction of how the AI systems outsmart the human beings. So doing that on a macroscopic scale, it could be very, mundane point of view, right? You have a family living in normal life, and then they start, things are starting to
get
not
weird
be the way that we're used to. And so I am actually organizing, or hoping to organize, a meeting next year with AI risk researchers and screenwriters and film directors.
Wonderful.
To actually brainstorm for a week on what this could look like, right? How, and Ex Machina was a great film. So it was
a good film.
This idea that you can only have happy endings.
Yeah, no.
It's actually not really right. You can still make a good film. But human extinction is, that's a little bit of a
abrasive,
downer, yeah. But I think we can do it, possibly by actually rewinding and then saying, well, let's make a different decision at that point.
There's still ways to make it empowering in some way, and not purely bleak.
Just see that that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? And so going back and looking at where were the decisions made that made it inevitable that we would end up losing.
You brought up an interesting point about you're talking to folks in the film domain to think about this. It sounds like explicitly in the grander mission of waking up the populace, because when I look at legacy media and I look at the political apparatus, I say, unless the base of the pyramid, the citizenry, cares about this, those next two strata. So this is the top of the pyramid. The AGI lab leaders all know it'll kill us. Yeah. They all know, right? It's like obvious. And then, but a lot of the developers there, some of them are just like not thinking big picture. Some of them kind of get it, but they have the same two-prong, two-choice issue I brought up. But the people who don't get it, so political apparatus, legacy media, citizenry, unless citizenry flips, the rest of that base of the ignorant pyramid doesn't flip. You're bringing up film. I'm very interested in the current efforts to flip the citizenry because I see them as tremendously uncoordinated. I'll meet with a YouTube channel person or a podcast person and they've never met each other and they're, I really want to get people to understand. I want to get people to understand. There's no coalition here. Right. What are the other efforts there that you see as worthwhile? And what do you hope happens to make that wake up occur? Because I didn't even know you were working on this. That's how disjointed this space is.
Well, so we created late last year the International Association for Safe and Ethical AI precisely for this purpose, to create coordination among there's more than 250 formal organizations that share these concerns, but most of them don't know about each other. Yeah. I only knew about 20 of them until we started making this list. And so we ran our first conference in Paris at the next to the AI Action Summit. We'll run another one next February in Paris, and we'll have a meeting as part of the AI Summit and so on. But part of the organization is going to be about, in some sense, educating or activating the public. Because clearly, when you do polls, right, 80% of people say we should never have AI systems smarter than humans, right? So they get it. They're not stupid. They see that, when the more intelligent species meets the less intelligent species,
very predictable.
Does not work out well. I think Jeff Hinton said we'd be in the position that chickens are with respect to human beings. I think that's a good analogy. But they're not thinking about it every day. They're not writing to their congressperson. I talked to a California assemblywoman, and they get something between 60 and 200 calls a day from constituents in that constituency, and it's a highly educated Bay Area constituency. And she said they have never had a call about
artificial intelligence, about
AGI or extension risk.
I think, I hope that the organization, I'll have to catch up with you offline on this, but that there can be sort of central watering holes for folks interested in waking up the public, or central calls to action. There's a fellow who runs the For Humanity podcast that's thinking about sort of where to drive people. I think Hendrix's Safe AI might have some prompts of where to go, or Pause AI might have things like that. But hopefully we'll see more and more of that. I want to make sure we have enough time to briefly touch on what the upsides could be from your vantage point. So we've talked a bit about challenges, current state of affairs, some of the technical governance ways we can maybe avoid the brutally horrendous, clearly uncontrollable AGI, just trucking everything, the robo eagle eating people thing. In terms of if we get this right, what it looks like, I'm interested in your take, because I've always considered your perspective to kind of be like what I would think of as like the classic perspective, which is to say, hey, for as long as we can think of into the future, certainly within our own lifetimes, AI is doing what humans want. Maybe it's improving healthcare, education, other things like that. But otherwise, it's in sort of its role and its place as a tool for hominids. We now see a lot more ideas coming into the mix here with some folks. Schmidt and one of his fellow writers of Genesis did a piece in Time about sort of the necessity to co-evolve. Altman has essays on this. Musk has essays on this, around sort of, as this thing accelerates, human populations are sort of shrinking. There's a natural draw to sort of expand our abilities. Already with our phones and computers, we're way more superhuman than any of our ancestors. Mm-hmm. And that isn't like okay, and it stops here thing. In other words, there's an inevitable continuance of that. Not that we should recklessly transhumanize for the heck of it, but we're seeing a panoply of different perspectives of what does happen. Some people might say we should have a period of stasis where we keep all those wacky futures away. We just make sure AGI doesn't kill us. And maybe from there, we talk about what to do. Other people would say, well, let's get there, and then let's make sure we never integrate with this stuff, and it never, turns into other things. There'd be some that would say, well, we should consider if we as a species are under change and flux, and if this stuff is going to start to potentially be part of the grander intelligence mix, we should consider the trajectory of that writhing mix as it expands into the cosmos. What is your take about kind of where we land and how we should think about that?
So, so if we succeed in figuring out how to make AI safe and beneficial and nonetheless super intelligent, we then face the next problem, and it's a problem that John Maynard Keynes talked about in 1930. Right, how to live our lives wisely and well. When
people before Keynes said, what was his statement? When what? What was it?
I'm not sure I can quote it correctly, but basically, when science has won leisure for everyone on Earth, right? And and so one vision, which is maybe the kind of default branch, is Wall-E. So in Wall-E, machines run the civilization. It happens to be on a giant sort of cruise spaceship. Machines run everything for everybody, and as a result, they lose the incentive to become, adult human beings, to have agency, to have knowledge and skills and purpose. And so they're depicted as giant, overweight babies who can barely stand and are just fed and entertained.
Lotus eaters.
They're not even that, right? Because in lotus eaters, those are fully formed adults.
So you're saying these are people that were never even able to turn into fully formed adults? Yeah, okay, got it.
Formed adults. And that, and I wrote about this in Human Compatible, right? The idea that, over human history, we put in about 1 trillion person years of teaching and learning to make sure that the next generation knows everything that we know, carries forward our civilization.
Yeah.
Right? And if we don't have to do that anymore, given that it takes a lot of time and effort, we probably won't.
Yeah.
And then this unbroken chain that goes back even to pre-human times breaks. That would be, in my view, a catastrophe almost as bad as extinction.
Does it break? So I think what you're positing is, life has bubbled up from the nematode through the rodentia to humanity, and the set of powers we wield. Not just, our physical powers, but cultural, technological power. We have all these extensions. When that wielding, that doing in the world, the stream of life, being part of it, not an eddy on the side, but the stream of life, when that stream of life no longer involves us, like you're saying that would be kind of the fate worse than death sort of scenario. I would concur, presuming that there is no stream. So if there were, either through cyborg or other means, rich sentient life, as you and I are richer than the nematode, that was continuing to blossom and bloom in ways that were relevant, even if it didn't exactly have opposable thumbs. One could say that continuance at least was going on, even if it wasn't us steering it for eternity. And I think there are some people who say, look, let's steer it as long as we can, but it's not going to be 1 billion years. But there's others that say, no, 1 billion years, white knuckles, the steering wheel of all agency and moral relevance must be hominid. And what is your stance there? What are your thoughts?
Oh, I would hope that the human species will continue to evolve biologically. I'm not really in agreement with, Rich Sutton, for example, who says quite fine for the human race to go extinct as long as machine intelligence is running around doing stuff.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting how the debate around machine sentience, right?
Yeah.
As you said, as long as sentient life, and the question is, are the machines sentient at all?
And I think it's ridiculous if people think it is right now. But what are your thoughts there?
Jeff Hinton this morning
Yeah,
was quite clear. But he also said the other day that he's a humanist in the sense that he cares that it be human beings.
Yeah.
And not sentient machines.
But it's wild how different the opinions are on sentience right now. I mean, I've interviewed Sutton, I've interviewed Bengio, and my favorite answer is we don't have a very good theory of what consciousness is, how it arises, how it operates, and so I'm not sure.
So as I say, you get the honorary UK citizenship for understatement. Congratulations. We don't have a very good theory. We don't have any theory.
At all. So I think,
I think everyone agrees there is a fact of the matter as to whether sentient experience is occurring in any given sort of spatio-temporal block. But at the moment, we have no way of answering the question of whether it's happening in any particular, except the one we inhabit.
Yes.
And so, it may end up being that the decision isn't made because we have some philosophical, scientific breakthrough in understanding. It's just that the preponderance of opinion comes to be. And I used to write that. In fact, the first edition of my textbook, I wrote that, and what happens if John Searle's granddaughter decides to marry a robot? Is he going to continue to say that they have no sentience?
This is I love the example.
So it's it just becomes, that's the way people think about it.
Yeah.
And we've certainly changed our views even in recent past about whether all human beings have souls. And certainly about whether animals have sentience and how far down, if down is even the right word, how far across the animal kingdom it spreads, and perhaps even the plant kingdom. So, but given that we at the moment have no way of knowing whether machine sentience exists, it would seem pretty risky to say, okay, I'm pretty confident, we're good. We will disappear and leave the universe to the machines. That would be, I think, the saddest thing that could possibly happen. Because for me, human experience is what constitutes value. And without that, there isn't any value. So, so let's put that to one side. Let's say, all right, we don't have the extinction, we don't have the infantilization branch. And one escape from the infantilization branch is that, first of all, that learning is of value in itself. That you literally have a better and more interesting life if you know stuff, if you understand your surroundings, if you understand other people, if you can do things, if you have agency, if you can make things, go places, bring about change, that has intrinsic value in itself because it makes your life interesting and worth living. So we would have, at least in theory, an incentive for people to learn and achieve agency. It's just that we'd have to reconstruct our society to feed that signal back to the young and to their parents. Because right now, the incentive, Johnny, you need to go to college because you need to get a
practical
purposes, you need to get a good job and be able to afford to buy a house and a car and blah, 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 right? I mean, the mundane but very real
Pressing,
incentive structures that we currently work on. So all that's got to be rejiggered so that we provide that incentive signal from your future self back to your 5-year-old self or your 12-year-old self and so on. And that's going to take time. And the other thing is that I think the killer app for AI is actually that its potential to provide extremely high quality education and learning opportunities to individuals. Right now, it's providing, homework doing to individuals, but it could, if it was designed properly, be as good or better than expert human tutors, who we know can train or educate children maybe twice as fast as
a group class
as a classroom, which is a very inefficient way of teaching.
I'll end on this because you're touching on some really important sort of like to what end questions, because I think even if we solve for safety, it's like, again, to what end? I really want to just pulse check on this as we close out. You're bringing up this sort of like, hey, we won't have the necessity of learning, but we ought still instill it. I might see a world where it's sort of like, okay, well, the reason life is rich and interesting when you're learning and enacting things in the world is because there is something for you to do, is because you're actually in the stream of life. And if you're not in the stream of life, in other words, if whatever is happening is unraveling through powers and means as far beyond your comprehension as what you are doing with me right now would be to your Labrador Retriever's comprehension, then this would still be just sort of a kind of babysitting and almost like a kind of sad outcome regardless. In other words, why not just stimulate the brain with what feels like learning? But it's not even real physics. It's like fake stuff, but it feels like challenge. It feels like whatever. And you're just kind of injecting.
Or put people into a video game where there is challenge. Of course. Right? Whether they can play it being in Starfleet.
You're saying the ultimate app is education. What if the ultimate app is the feeling of challenge, like the flow state being conjured, or whatever state you want being conjured? It would seem like, is it still rich, human, worthy experience when we no longer have our hands around the sort of agentic forces unfolding the world as we seem to have done? Like, is there still meaning there?
Well, I think that's a valid question. And, Robert Nozick's experience machine was intended to actually refute the idea that
I think he was wrong.
Experience is the only thing that matters, because so the idea of the experience machine is it's a virtual reality device, kind of like the Matrix, where once you're in it, you don't know that you're in it, and the life that you experience there can be as dramatic and exciting and wonderful as you can possibly imagine. And Nozick's view was, but this proves that it isn't just experience that matters, because you would never choose to go into that machine. But it turns out that actually, people do choose to go into that machine.
Absolutely. I think he was wildly wrong.
And so that's one answer. But when I've asked this question, so one of the things I did after writing the book was to organize a series of workshops. I wanted to do the following. I wanted to take AI researchers, futurists, science fiction writers, economists, and lock them in a room and say, I'm not letting you out until you figure out a vision of a world with super intelligent AI that you want your children to live in. So then COVID happened, so I couldn't lock anyone in a room. I could only lock them in a Zoom room.
And they're already locked there.
The Zoom room didn't work as well. But I have to say, after, with maybe 100 people altogether participated, including world-renowned figures, over 4 workshops, there is no answer forthcoming as yet. So there you have it, right? We are spending probably trillions of dollars to create a world that so far nobody wants to live in.
Yeah.
And might also inadvertently destroy us along the way. So how smart is that?
I think
I don't have a good answer. I'm sorry.
I'm with you. I mean, I think there is a weird intuitive sense that being in the stream of life matters. Like that sort of being part of the force that is unfolding, the becoming, the process that is the world matters. And it strikes me that if we are sort of coddled and wholly out of that stream, I sort of think nature sloughs those parts of itself off. And you and I were just discussing, we know not if this thing be nature, if it be sentient, if it have some of the traits that maybe, we consider valuable. Again, folks like Sutton would say it is automatically a worthy successor. I would say there are many unworthy successors and we should be wary of them. But, you had mentioned you would hope maybe, in enough time we'd evolve biologically. Is there an opposition, whether in 10 years or 100 years or 1,000 years from your vantage point, for any semblance of the kinds of merger and upload scenarios that some thinkers, like again, Schmidt and Altman, many folks have sort of posited this is likely to be inevitable for us to still be part of the stream of life, to be part of the active and genuine becoming portion of the world and not sitting on the side, sort of keeping ourselves in shape and being entertained and educated just for the sake of leeching off of some grander intelligence. Like, is there an opposition for you around the technological part of our growing rather than just the biological?
So it's interesting. I mean, I read a lot of science fiction too, especially when I was a kid, and it's always interesting to try to think what on a grand galactic spatial and temporal scale, what kinds of evolution might occur. And actually, if you read the culture novels, which are Ian Banks's novels,
they're extremely anthropocentric, but it is what it is.
Everyone points to those as that's the best future we can think of with super intelligent AI.
Yeah.
And it's quite clear that effectively, with the exception of a tiny fraction of the human population who get to be in contact, which is the equivalent of Starfleet in Star Trek, right? The people who get to zoom around the universe and fight off new alien species or colonize new worlds and stuff like that. But for the vast majority of people, there's nothing to do.
Yeah.
Except engage in self-destructive play, live on cruise ships, goof around, take drugs.
I dislike the entire vision. I dislike every bit of it.
But the same is true in Star Trek. Everyone wants to be in Starfleet. They don't show you that much of what's not happening in Starfleet, but it's pretty clear that people are kind of bored. They don't have any challenge in their lives because they have the matter converters where anything you want, you just tell the system and it makes it for you. And in the culture novels, there are other civilizations outside of the human sphere where they explicitly reject the use of these kinds of technologies, which you might call neutering technologies, because they don't want to be neutered. They realize that
kind of Butlerian
that their future would be pointless and unpleasant if they chose that technology path. And there are so many people who are technology determinists. They say it's going to happen, right? Because it's possible, it will happen. And it's just not true, right? There are several paths we could have taken that we have chosen not to. Cloning lots of human beings, we've chosen not to do that. Blinding laser weapons is another example, right? It didn't take 60 years to figure that out. It took a few months to figure out that we did not want to fight wars with blinding laser weapons and have millions of blind people, veterans, wandering around in our cities. And so we banned that technology before it ever was used. So we can choose. And
do you suspect
we should think about this decision. We should not let it simply be taken on our behalf by a small coterie of ultra-billionaires who read too much science fiction.
Well, I think there's a lot of, I don't have it. I think that the incentive structures, I think, are really, really tough. But with just touching on and making sure I'm clarifying your point as we wrap here, this is, again, the fact that it needn't run amok on its own. We've made some of these choices. Some people would make the argument, if there will be development of some technologies, and if we want to have the best chance of staying in that stream, then what feels somewhat inevitable, this phone used to be, a dozen different devices that were all very big and chunky and much worse than what can be done here. Soon a lot more will be done in virtual spaces. Essentially all of my work is just ones and zeros. It's nothing else, but it is quite real and it is quite useful. And it seems like the going virtual and going miniature and kind of going in the mergers in some way, shape or form. If we stretch 100, 1,000 years where kids have had best friends on their phone since the day they were born, it seems like, I'm not saying it's inevitable, but it seems as though a loosening of the ideas of the sacred world of atoms will pretty likely occur, just like a loosening about cultural exposure has occurred for you and I versus our great-grandparents. Yeah. It seems as though those things will loosen and potentially some components of merger will be flirted enough with where they become somewhat normal, just as being international citizens feels kind of normal to you and I. Do you think that doesn't have credence, or we should push back against that in principle?
No, I think we should explore the possibilities. And if someone can come up with a vision that seems attractive, that doesn't have enormous pitfalls, then we could certainly explore the possibilities. As you say, we have adopted a lot of changes in our form of life, some of them technological, some of them cultural. And I think for the most part, it's made things better. But there are certainly those who think that no, life is better without cell phones. I think many of my friends, sometimes inadvertently experience a week without connectivity and realize that, my goodness, I was so much happier than I was otherwise. Or they, as soon as they get home, they put their cell phone in a box, and then they find that this improves their quality of life considerably. So we should be free to explore these ideas, options, but not ideas that could lead irreversibly to termination.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap, I guess I certainly hope that the increased momentum in the governance world around these concerns continues before we chat next, whenever that is. And I think the seed in the mind of the audience as we wrap up here is there a preference for human continuity as the continuance or stream of life, or is there middle ground, that these are really diligent, discerning choices that we have to be overt about? So lots to think about. And Stuart, I appreciate the time. It's been a blast.
Pleasure.
Thanks as always.
So that's all for this episode of The Trajectory. A big thank you to Stuart for being able to hop on. And thank you to you for listening through all the way through to the end of this episode. Would love your thoughts on if these in-person episodes seem any more interesting than when we do them on Zoom calls. I'm kind of leveling up my audio-video game. Many of you know I run a full-time market research company. Doing these interviews about posthumanism is not my full-time job, although hopefully relatively soon it will be. But I'm starting to get used to sort of doing interviews in person. Would love to know, did this stand out? Is this helpful? Is this useful? If you got this from a newsletter, feel free to reply there or chip it in the comments. I'm really going to be working on sort of the in-person interview game. But let's get to some topics on Stuart's interview directly. I loved the bird analogy, the idea of sort of the giant eagle that occasionally eats some of the passengers while it's traveling or things along those lines. There's credence to the idea that, if we have really hyper minimal degrees of sort of control and assurance around the tech, that maybe it makes sense to take a different direction for the tech itself. Stuart himself pretty much admits, though, in this episode, he does not suspect as a species we will completely pivot in that direction, at least not until some kind of disaster. So I think there's credence there. Stuart and I obviously have slightly different ideas about where things will go in the far future. You saw me start to lean a little bit into what would become of intelligence itself, and not everybody necessarily goes there. But in terms of near-term concerns about risk, I think there is some credence to the idea of thinking of other technical strata and approaches to getting to AGI. I very much appreciated Stuart's thoughts around what international coordination could look like in practice and what it would look like to get that momentum ball rolling. One thing I want to make note of before the episode ends is Stuart very much is walking the talk on this. So Stuart's involved in the OECD AI Futures Group. He's chairing that, co-chairing that group, where people are thinking about, situations, scenarios, around artificial general intelligence and kind of what that might look like, or what much stronger AI would look like in practice. He's spoken and written a great deal about this. Of course, he has his work at Berkeley, his book, but he also has the International Dialogues on AI Safety, which I would recommend people check out. The URL is idais.ai. I'll make sure to have it linked in the show notes. But this is sort of an effort to get academics together to start to congeal what are the shared positives, shared negatives around where the tech is going, what its impact might be, what we might do about it. I think all track two dialogue around some degree of solidarity, of sort of shared risks, shared benefits, is incredibly important work. And Stuart is undeniably trailblazing in that domain, in addition to having trailblazed on just raising the alarm around AGI risk in general. So a real pleasure to chat with Stuart. I'm glad I caught him early enough in the day to have tons of energy, some good humor, some great analogies, and I hope you liked it as well. So thanks again for being here, and I look forward to catching you the next time here on The Trajectory.